Hello there, squirrels. It's time to read. It's past time. And I hope I won't fall asleep on you. I don't feel sleepy now, but I read myself to sleep. We're on chapter 5 of The Moving Finger, a Miss Marple mystery by Miss Agatha Christie. I see that there has been one omission in my story. So far I have made little or no mention of Mrs. Dane Calthrop, or indeed of the Reverend Caleb Dane Calthrop. And yet both the vicar and his wife were distinct personalities. Dane Calthrop himself was perhaps a being more remote from everyday life than anyone I've ever met. His existence was in his books and in his study and in his intimate knowledge of early church history. Mrs. Dane Calthrop, on the other hand, was quite terrifyingly on the spot. I have perhaps purposely put off mentioning her because I was from the first a little afraid of her. She was a woman of character and of almost Olympian knowledge. She was not in the least the typical vicar's wife, but that, as I set it down, makes me ask myself, what do I know of vicars' wives? The only one I remembered well was a quiet, nondescript creature devoted to a big, strong husband with a magnetic way of preaching. She had so little general conversation that it was a puzzle to know how to sustain a conversation with her. Otherwise, I was depending on the fictional presentment of vicars' wives, caricatures of females poking their noses everywhere and uttering platitudes. Probably no such type exists. Mrs. Dane Calthrop never poked her nose in anywhere, yet she had an uncanny power of knowing things, and I soon discovered that almost everyone in the village was slightly afraid of her. She gave no advice and never interfered, yet she represented to any uneasy conscience the deity personified. I've never seen a woman more indifferent to her material surroundings. On hot days she would stride about clad in Harris tweed, and in rain or even sleet I have seen her absent-mindedly race down the village street in a cotton dress of printed poppies. She had a long, thin, well-bred face like a greyhound, and a most devastating sincerity of speech. She stopped me in the high street the day after Megan had come to lunch. I had the usual feeling of surprise because Mrs. Dane Calthrop's progress resembled... Oh, wait a minute. Itch. A foot. Resembled coursing more than walking, and her eyes were always fixed on the distant horizon so that you felt sure her real objective was about 1.5 miles away. "Oh," she said, "Mr. Burton." She said it rather triumphantly, as someone might who had solved a particularly clever puzzle. I admitted that I was Mr. Burton, and Mrs. Dane Calthrop stopped focusing on the horizon and seemed to be trying to focus on me instead. Now what, she said, did I want to see you about? I could not help her there. She stood frowning, deeply perplexed. "Something rather nasty," she said. "I'm sorry about that," I said, startled. "Ah," cried Mrs. Dane Calthrop, "I hate my love with an A." What's that mean? I hate my love with an A, a capital A. That's it. Anonymous letters. Okay. What's the story you've brought down here about anonymous letters? I didn't bring it. I said it was here already. Nobody got any until you came, though, said Miss Dane Calthrop accusingly. But they did, Mrs. Dane Calthrop. The trouble had already started. Oh dear, said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. I don't like that. She stood there, her eyes absent and far away again. She said, I can't help feeling it's all wrong. We're not like that here. Envy, of course, and malice, and all the mean, spiteful little sins. But I didn't think there was anyone who would do that. No, I really didn't. And it distresses me, you see, because I ought to know. Her fine eyes came back from the horizon and met mine. They were worried and seemed to hold the honest bewilderment of a child. How should you know? I said. I usually do. I've always felt that's my function. Caleb preaches good sound doctrine and administers the sacraments. My eyesight has really gotten crappy lately, y'all. That's why I'm having to do all this stuff. I shouldn't have to. I gotta get an exam. Stress me. I ought to know. Bewilderment of a child. How should you know? I said. I usually do. I've always felt that's my function. Caleb preaches good sound doctrine and administers the sacraments. Sorry, reading all this again. That's a priest's duty, but if you admit marriage at all for a priest, then I think his wife's duty is to know what people are feeling and thinking, even if she can't do anything about it. And I have. No, and I haven't the least idea whose mind is. She broke off, adding absently, they're such silly letters, too. Have you, had any yourself? I was a little diffident of asking, but Mrs. Dane Calthrop replied perfectly naturally, her eyes opening a little wider. Oh, yes, 2. Like the number 2. No, 3. I forget exactly what they said. Something very silly about Caleb and the schoolmistress, I think. Quite abnormal. No, quite absurd, because Caleb has absolutely no taste for fornication. He never has had, so lucky being a clergyman. Quite, I said. Oh, quite. Caleb would have been a saint, said Miss Dane Calthrop, if he hadn't been yet. Hadn't been just a little too intellectual. I did not feel qualified to answer this criticism in any way. Mrs. Dane Calthrop went on, leaping back from her husband to the letters in rather a puzzling way. There's so many things the letters might mean. There are so many things the letters might say but don't. That's what's so curious. I should hardly have thought they erred on the side of restraint, I said bitterly. But they don't seem to know anything. None of the real things, though. You mean those fine, vague eyes met mine? Well, of course, there's plenty of adultery here. And everything else, any amount of shameful secrets. Why doesn't the writer use those? She paused and then asked abruptly, What did they say in your letter? They suggested that my writer wasn't my writer. Wait a minute. Lord help. Every time I start going to sleep. Why doesn't the writer use those? She paused. What did they say in your letter? They suggested that my sister wasn't my sister. And is she? Mrs. Dane Calthrop asked the question with unembarrassed, friendly interest. Certainly Joanna's my sister. Mrs. Dane Calthrop nodded her head. That just shows you what I mean. I dare say there are other things. Her clear, uninterested eyes looked at me thoughtfully, and I suddenly understood why Limstock was afraid of Mrs. Dane Calthrop. In everybody's life there are hidden chapters which they hope may never be known. I felt that Mrs. Dane Calthrop knew them. For once in my life I was positively delighted. And when Amy Griffith's hearty voice boomed out, "Hello, Maud. Glad I've just caught you. I want to suggest an alteration of a date for the sale of work." "Morning, Mr. Burton," she went on. "I must just pop into the grocer's and leave my order. Then I'll come along to the Institute if that suits you." Yes, that will do." Oh, shoot. "That will do quite well," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop. Amy Griffith went into the international stores. Mrs. Dane Calthrop, why can't they use some pronouns? Lord help. Said, "Poor thing." I was puzzled. Surely she could not be pitying Amy. She went on, however, "You know, Mr. Burton, I'm rather afraid." "About this letter?" "About this letter business?" "Yes, you see, it must mean." She paused, lost in thought, her eyes screwed up. Then she said slowly, as one who solves a problem, "Blind hatred, yes, blind hatred. But even blind hatred, yes, blind hatred. But even a blind man might stab to your heart by pure chance. And what would happen then, Mr. Burton?" We were to know that before another day had passed. And that's all of part 1. I know that's not long, but oh Lord, I'm going to stop there. Y'all have a lovely day or evening, Sunday evening at 7, just after 7 as I read this, May 1st, 2022. Be sweet, don't be ugly. Love ya. Bye-bye.